This episode of the Craftsman Online podcast is sponsored by Bricks Masons. From elegant Masonic rings that showcase your commitment to our craft to finely crafted regalia and apparel that honor your tradition, Bricks Masons delivers quality and craftsmanship that truly stands out. Shop now at bricksmasons.com and use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, to receive free shipping with your first order.
The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, Masonic Authority, or craftsmanonline.com. Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York.
Hey, welcome back. It's Right Worshipful Brother Michael Arce, and it's always an honor to have one of our most listened to podcast guests back on the Craftsman Online podcast. And this week, I guarantee you're going to learn something new, the 3-minute rule. What does that mean? You'll find out when it comes to Masonic protocol, etiquette, and decorum. Thanks to our guest, Worshipful Brother Wes Latchford. Welcome back to the podcast, Brother Wes.
It is always a pleasure to sit in and talk about whatever weirdness comes to our minds.
And for this episode, we're going to go on a stretch here. We're not talking comic books. We're not talking Star Wars. We're not talking anything science fiction. We're actually getting into Masonic talk because Wes, aside from being a wonderful brother, is also a district education officer for the 56th district, which is in Virginia Beach, and a committee member of the Masonic Education Committee for the Grand Lodge of Virginia. So tell us a little bit about your role doing that outside of the comics and the craft episodes that our listeners might know you better for, and kind of what's inspired your research into Masonic civility.
For the last several years, at least as long as I've been part of the Masonic Education Committee, we have been working to update and reinvigorate the Grand Lodge's educational publications and then also our online university, which the last time it had a significant overhaul done to it was the very, very early days of the internet. And so a lot of the technology that is being used has long been surpassed by much more robust online learning management systems, but the conversion of the old to the new and all of that has become a technical challenge. So we haven't been able to move as quickly as we had wanted. One of the things that we wanted to include in some of the new online curriculum was something that talked about Masonic protocol, etiquette, and decorum. And so I got tasked with putting together that online curriculum. Actually, it has proved very, very interesting, trying to put together some training materials that did several different things. One, there is Masonic protocol, etiquette, and decorum, those things that we do in the lodge that are just accepted as a standard practice in Freemasonry. But what I discovered was because of modern society and where we currently are, as Americans and as, an international, globally connected community, with all of the technology and everything else that we have, I found it was very important to start with the basics, not just dive into, okay, here's what you do when you need to excuse yourself to go to the restroom during the middle of a lodge meeting. What is this stuff and why is it important? Not just for Freemasonry, but for the world itself. And so it led down some really interesting rabbit holes that I'm hoping has turned into some really good instruction and workshops that a group of us have been doing across the Commonwealth of Virginia pretty much since February, about 2 weekends a month. We didn't realize how big Virginia is until you have to drive from Virginia Beach all the way out to basically the border of Tennessee. And it's like, yeah, wow, this really is a long state at the very bottom border.
And all the accents that come in between. Those are, living in Virginia myself, just to hear in the northern part of it, it's very interesting when I talk with colleagues that are living in West Virginia and commuting into Northern Virginia near the nation's capital, and you're like, wow. And this is also a big topic to get into. I know as a brother, like when I see it on the trestle board, tonight we're going to have a discussion on Masonic etiquette. I'm like, oh, great. When you start to get beyond that and really into it, and this is the part that I know you as an esoteric guy, you start to sit here and you look at it and you're like, okay, the way that the officers are sitting in a lodge room, they're kings. The reason why the master says something and then it's repeated to one warden and then it's repeated to another warden before it's repeated to me is the way that royalty would have spoken back then. And when you really get into thinking about the third degree and remembering the people that are portraying those parts, and then you start to understand the whys and how this all happened and how it's a very important part of like the respect that we put into the practice of our craft. Is that kind of what drew you into this part? Because Masonic decorum and etiquette, like that's a very unique area of Freemasonry to get into.
The first of it started with really just understanding what's the difference. We say them really fast all together, right? Protocol, etiquette, and decorum.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but what are they and why are they important and what's the difference? Protocol, is just a code of conduct and behavior. It's agreed upon ways of conducting business. And it originally started, as a lot of things did, in ancient Greece. Protocol is actually the combination of two Greek words, protos, which means first, and then kola, which means glue. Protocolon was actually the first sheet of papyrus that was put on a scroll or a book that said what was inside of it. Where that moved then within Greece itself, we think of Greece now, as a single nation state, but the longest time it was individual city states. We all talk about Athens and Spartan and Corinth and everything else. And so this protocolos was the way they did diplomacy amongst each other. And so there would be heralds or ambassadors, some of the finest orators of the day, like Plato and Aristotle, who would be assigned to negotiate treaties and economic agreements between these nation states. And the thing that's interesting about it was this was all done in the public square, which is why it was interesting that this would then have a tie to what we find in the fellowcraft degree, where we first really start talking about the 7 liberal arts and sciences, the first 3 of which are the traditional arts, which are grammar, rhetoric, and logic, is known as the trivium, which these folks were immensely skilled at. As I've taught this, I've said, okay, and so here's the Masonic protocol. This is a real world case study where you've received a petition, from someone seeking the degrees in Freemasonry, and the vouchers on it happen to be brothers in the Grand Lodge of Iceland. True story. Masonic protocol says that the secretary of your lodge does not call the secretary of their lodge in Reykjavik and determine whether or not they are brothers in good standing. The protocol is it goes from the lodge to the Grand Lodge. The Grand Lodge talks to the other Grand Lodge, and it works this way. So that's protocol. Etiquette comes to us from France. Over time, started to be known colloquially as little signs. But it was the customary rules and codes of polite behavior. And it really started during the reign of King Louis XIV, who had this beautiful summer home known as Versailles, where they would love to throw garden parties. The groundskeeper came to the king and said, yeah, you hold these parties and all of your guests completely trash all my landscaping and the flower gardens. They have no understanding of how they're supposed to behave. And so he was like, well, put up signs. Thus, we get for down here in Tidewater, dogs and sailors keep off the grass. And then decorum is just how one handles himself, right? And so we have that too. I actually have a great cartoon from James Gilray that I use in training that's titled "Company Shocked at a Lady Ginging Up to Ring the Service Bell." It's hilarious because the woman is reaching for the service bell, which women are not supposed to do. That's, the courtesy of, and the etiquette of the man. And so all of these suitors are literally falling all over themselves and completely lost their decorum because she's doing this. And that resonates okay. But then I turn and I say, okay, now picture the woman ringing the bell as the worshipful master obligating someone at the altar, and he stumbles over a word. And all of these other folks are the past masters losing their decorum out of their mind because that's not how we do this. So protocol, etiquette, and decorum.
We have spoken about some of the benefits that come from Freemasonry, like the leadership that some people overlook, like, oh, the making, a good man better. This is also part of it. I feel there's so many brothers that I've sat in lodge with that, having a dark suit and tie, the only time that they had that before in their life was when they were getting married or when there was a family funeral. And now they're, wearing this and they're coming to lodge meetings. And here's the other thing that we get in Freemasonry is this way to conduct yourself. And as you said, like a polite society that I don't want to blame it on COVID. I think it's been going on way before that, even that there was just this disconnect with just how the etiquette, the decorum, the protocol, as you've mentioned, like how to do things, unless you worked in a certain profession or lived in a certain, place or status in life, like these things weren't really taught to you. But here we are sharing this and showing this in our meetings in everyday life. How do you feel that like this has benefited you, or the lessons that maybe you have been able to share with new members or new men that have come into the craft?
One of the things that's been fun about this, and I actually broke this course up into 3 different volumes. So volume 1, is what I kind of just went through, what is protocol, etiquette, and decorum, and who cares? Then the second half actually talks about where this behavior originated within Masonic lodges, a lot of it from Anderson's constitutions and a lot of the stuff that was written during that time period that lays out how you're supposed to behave as a Mason. But what that actually was translating into how you behave as a gentleman. It's actually been interesting. As an aside, I've been working on something for Lodge for next week, and it's this idea that I know several brothers we've talked about struggled with is if we're not supposed to discuss politics in the lodge and obey civil authority and the magistrate, how come we had all these Masons who are big names within the American Revolution? And in looking at that, a lot of that comes from that Enlightenment ideal, and in particular for American Masonry, that fact that we had some individuals who, they weren't bottom of the heap and they weren't, royalty in the sense of being titled and holding positions, within the king's court. They were self-made men in the colonies. And with that, Masonry allowed all of these groups to get together, to work together. And then also a lot of things we did we're emphasizing it. One of the things that I've talked about is, why do we do introductions in the lodge? And it's because for a lot of us, that's maybe the only time we'll actually learn that skill set. I can't count the number of times that my wife and I have been at a function and I will get the elbow because I have forgotten to introduce her to someone or introduce them to her.
Right.
Right. And so the reason we do that in the lodge is to learn that etiquette. If you're talking for someone, more than 30 seconds, introduce yourself. If you've been in the proximity of someone for more than 3 minutes, introduce yourself, talk to them. Don't just kind of stand there and be a bum. And so there's a lot of the things that take place within the lodge that are meant to help us improve ourselves, our ability to communicate, our ability to interact with each other, and our ability to better ourselves and our lodge and our communities, that a lot of times we just take as ritual. Right? It's just ritual. Yeah, but it was put in place for a reason, and you have to think about what that reason is.
The Craftsman Online podcast is now sponsored by BricksMasons.com, our favorite destination for all of our Masonic shopping needs. Whether it's apparel for yourself or a cool gift idea for another brother, make BricksMasons.com your online marketplace where tradition meets innovation. A brother once told me that he got a gift of a miniature working tool set from his lodge after he was raised, and I had not seen this until I visited BricksMasons.com. These are really cool miniature working tools. They come in a very neat velvet box. And it's an excellent gift for less than $70 that you can give to a newly raised Master Mason so that they have a set of working tools to carry with them. Whether their labors are at home, at work, or in the office, visit bricksmasons.com and explore their extensive catalog. Elevate your Masonic experience with style and substance. Plus, Craftsman Online podcast listeners use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, at checkout to enjoy free shipping with your first order.
One of the things, too, that led to a lot of this research and a lot of putting this together is it's creeping into the lodge. We like to think that it's just, well, it's society and society this and society that. Take a good look next time, you're sitting with brothers, either at dinner or in the lodge or afterwards, or not even in a lodge setting, but just interacting. Take notice of some of the things that we bemoan when we see it, at Walmart or at the grocery store or driving. We actually play the 3-minute rule with driving, where, you have the charge at the end of a Master Mason's lodge. Basically, society has a claim on your kind offices do good unto all. But the thing is, you can't get out of the lodge parking lot until probably, if you're lucky, 3 minutes go by where you weren't yelling at somebody who is an idiot driver. We're letting that get inside of the lodge, and it's unfortunate, even so much so that I've seen lodges where, because they're not familiar with why we do these introductions, and yes, they can be laborious, and for those of us, who are obnoxiously involved in the craft, you're standing up 5, 6, 7 times, during the introductions, because you run through past masters and then visiting masters and then launch committeemen and then this. But again, when you remember the reason we do that, which is, as you said, is to become more adept at it, to make it second nature, where your elbow's not having, you're not having to get your wife's bony elbow in your ribs because you've already remembered that. And that goes back, and one of the fun things to talk about is this nifty little book, George Washington's Rules of Civility and Decent Behavior in Company and Conversation.
Don't spit in the campfire.
Yeah.
That was my favorite rule.
But the thing that's interesting about that, he wrote those down as a teenager. Everybody, thinks that it was just this incredible insight by, the father of our country. Historic research has pretty much shown that it was actually a homework assignment. The original etiquette manual had actually been written by Jesuits in 1595. Another well-known Masonic brother, Benjamin Franklin, compiled what he called his Book of Virtues. And it was 13 different characteristics that he believed he could not only aspire to, but actually achieve. His goal was the attainment of moral perfection. And here were the 13 virtues that he had. And he literally, in a book, had a little matrix where every day of the week and every one of the virtues, he would grade himself at the end, at the end of the day on how well he did. But see if any of these sound familiar. Temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, tranquility, humility, and chastity. And if you know anything about Brother Ben, he definitely did not get moral perfection on the chastity part.
Did that one have a line through it? That word?
Yeah, I don't know if they had highlights or strike throughs or anything else.
He was working on that one.
He was working hard, very, very hard. But again, two very, very well-known colonial area Masons who got it and understood that this is how we take and make ourselves better.
So ahead of our podcast, you had shared some of the notes that you've written for the presentations that you gave on this topic. And one of the facts that jumped out on me was the fact that you said, quote, "We are surrounded by strangers who will remain strangers." And I know we've talked about this a little bit, like how as brothers, we have the introductions, we know each other in our lodges. But I started thinking about this as I, run through my neighborhood every day, and I was doing the inventory. I'm like, I don't know who my neighbor is to the left of me. I don't know the name of my neighbor or the family that lives to the right of me. I know the people that live across the street because my wife and I, when they moved into the neighborhood, we made an effort to go across the street, as far as that may seem, to introduce ourselves to this young couple that bought this house. I know the other neighbor that lives across the street because we wave at each other on Mondays and we both wheel out our garbage and put trash out there. But I'm just wondering, like, do you feel like this is kind of the new normal, that everybody just lives in their own lane? And if that's the case, is this where there's this avenue of opportunity for Freemasons, as we love and enjoy each other's company in our lodges, to kind of spread that light into our own communities, literally in our own neighborhoods?
Yeah, so I would love to take credit for the phrase "surrounded by strangers who will remain strangers," but that's actually by Dr. Pierre Forney, who wrote the book "Choosing Civility: The 25 Rules of Considerate Conduct." And here's what he said, and this is what I've used in some of the writings I've done and in the workshops that we've hosted. Our manners inevitably suffer when we are poorly trained in self-restraint. We are used to seeing others as a mean to the satisfaction of our own desires rather than an end in themselves. We are overly concerned about financial gain or professional achievement. We are constantly besieged by stress and fatigue. And then that last line, we are surrounded by strangers who will remain strangers. And the thing that is most striking about that is he wrote that book in 2002. And it resonates more in 2024 than I think he would have ever imagined when he penned it in 2002. 2019, there was a report called Civility in America, a nationwide survey. And it was by research firm Weber Shandwick and then the marketing firm Powell Tate. And in part of their research and discovery, they found that 70% of Americans believe incivility has reached a crisis proportion. And those who participated in the survey said that they believed they averaged almost 3 incidents of incivility during a day.
They don't live in our area and deal with our drivers, because that number would be a lot higher.
Again, remember the 3-minute rule. You pull out of a large parking lot, to circumscribe those desires and keep those passions. That was backed up by a follow-on report that was done, interestingly enough, by the American Bar Association, where in their civic literacy, basically how much do we know about civics and the way that our country does business, they said that they believed 85% said that civility was worse today compared to 10 years ago. It's not getting better. And Masonry has some of the tools that can help with that. Another quote that I love to use, and it was actually spoken and is attributed to Marcus Tullius Cicero. If we're forced at every hour to watch and listen to horrible events, this constant stream of ghastly impressions will deprive even the most delicate among us all respect for humanity. At which point, when I say that, I usually pick this up and go, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I present Exhibit A. Think about how much, while we're in a social setting or in a lodge setting, and we ought to be paying attention to our brothers, we're busy, with this literal piece of crack that stimulates the same part of your brain as some of our most addictive drugs.
Our cell phones are a big problem with this. I was just talking with a very close friend last night, and living here in DC, this is a childhood friend of mine that we grew up together. We're very like-minded, but we're on completely different opposite ends of the political spectrum. But we were able to have a very civil and I would say meaningful discussion. Like, he made some valid points and concerns that he had. I was like, I'd never really thought about that before. I made a few comments, and I'm sure he was probably waking up this morning and going, oh, that's interesting. And all I can do is sit here and say, the reason I was able to have this conversation without it getting into, verbal fisticuffs is the fact that because I am a member of a Masonic lodge and I meet with men who I hold dearly and get to I have the privilege of calling them brothers, knowing that they come from many different walks of life and they bring in all these unique ideas and their own, original thumbprints and fingerprints on all of these things. I kind of look at it as like, it's almost the call for Freemasonry and Masons right now. Like, we have to try to help restore this civility in society. As you mentioned, the quote from Cicero, but just everything that comes with when you get into the real deeper meaning of the lessons that come with our ritual and everything that's taught to us Masonically, like, this is we joked about it, like the 3-minute rule, but it's supposed to extend outside of the lodge. It's like, yes, improve yourself first, and then go amongst the people and spread that light.
And we have the tools, or at least we're supposed to have the tools. The unfortunate thing is a lot of times we're given the tools, but we're not taught how to use them. We don't understand the proper use of the tool. I like to use the phrase, well, if the only tool you think you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. We have all of these working tools, and they all teach incredibly valuable lessons beyond just what you are required to learn as part of your catechism. And in order to advance in the degrees, take a moment and think about what those are. And along that line, a lot of this started in reading the Civility Mosaic, which is a great book that talks about the exact idea that Freemasonry has the tools, that we can learn again to be civil with each other and agree to disagree. So to go back to the Hadwick and Tate report on civility that I mentioned earlier, part of the findings they found in it as well was that 62% of Americans said that if an organization existed to make it easier to support civility and to get involved, they would be likely to participate or support it. They went so far as to identify the segment of the population who would be very likely to participate in this kind of an organization. And when I say this kind of an organization, I'm thinking, the tools of Freemasonry. That segment of the population are Gen Zs and millennials and parents with children under the age of 18, because they want to correct what's taking place and what they see in society. They're seeing what's happening to them, and they want to be able to try and provide a better example. One of the other things in the surveys that was interesting, that goes to the idea that if we let this outside incivility creep into our lodges, we're not doing ourselves any favor. March 2023 survey, 26% of people said they have left a job because it's been of incivility in the workplace. And I got to thinking about it. I'm like, okay, so if 26% of people are willing to leave their job, who's going to leave a lodge, or who's not even going to petition to become part of the fraternity if that's their first initial experience, because we have become so accustomed of working that way and not bettering ourselves that we don't even realize we're doing it.
It's interesting to get to that point, because if you think about it, that would be 1 out of every 4 Masons that you would meet would leave a lodge, or as we know in the craft, like demit from being a member of that lodge to go affiliate.
You hope they would demit and not just
walk away entirely.
Yeah.
When I was reading through your report of the reports, that struck a chord with me, because I am one of those people. I left my mother lodge because of a disagreement with a member of that lodge. And that can be a very dangerous moment, because as you pointed out, I could have just said, forget it, I'm out. This podcast wouldn't exist today. I would not be a Freemason today. My Masonic career would have essentially ended because of, quote unquote, one bad apple spoiling, a whole bunch. So that is something that when I read that, it really, when I say it jumped out to me, I thought about that. I'm like, how many brothers are we losing to the craft because of the actions of a couple bad ones that are forcing them or enabling them to make a decision to where they just walk away? And that was very, very upsetting to me to see that.
Every Mason can probably either knows of someone or has been that someone that has been in that situation. But what is also important with it is not only the actions of the one person, but the inactions of those around him. We used a term in the military that a behavior not corrected is a behavior condoned. Then you are as culpable as they are by not intervening, right? Just being the innocent bystander. And that's not what we're called to do either. And again, I think that's part of those tools that we can provide, is we're supposed to know how to do that. We were supposed to have learned how to, in a most friendly manner, do these different things and try to rectify the situation. Unfortunately, for some, that's just the way they are, right? And the other thing to remember is that's okay. It's okay to demit from your mother lodge and go find someplace else sometimes it's just not the right time. It's not the right circumstance. It's not the right group of brothers. But don't just go covert and disappear, like so many people do. As before we even started this, I was going through, it's that time of the year to put together okay, here's our potential suspensions for non-payment of dues, and that can get that in and of itself can get very political, as you take and try to decide what's best for the craft, the lodge, and the individual concerned.
This discussion and the ones that you present in lodge or lodges around the Grand Lodge of Virginia, that's why this is important, that brothers understand that there are, as you outlined, the three parts of this: the civility, the decorum, the etiquette. And that's why it's important that we, as you mentioned, the 3-minute rule. I love that. But I always refer to Freemasonry as it's a practice. It's like practicing to be an attorney or practicing to be a doctor. It's something that you put into your life every day, and you're working to improve, to get better, using the teachings that you've gained. And that's the charge for us, is that, as you pointed out, no person is perfect, and we're all working to become a better version of ourselves. And it is important that we work on ourselves and then our lodges, so that we don't lose our brothers and that we keep them close to us and we look out for them as well. So yeah, I love this. This has actually been the most engaging Masonic etiquette, decorum, and civility conversation I've ever had, which I knew this would happen. So thank you, Wes.
This is something that I usually close with. A lodge and its brethren who understand the importance of protocol, etiquette, and decorum plays a critical role in fostering civility, not only in our gentle craft, to provide a bulwark against reduced enthusiasm, declining attendance, dwindling participation, projects, activities, and services, but they actually contribute to that reduced public awareness or opinion and flat out overall poor member experience that some brothers have with the fraternity. I'm often amused by and reminded by the brothers who will talk about that particular individual that they looked up to who was a Freemason. Right. And back before the days where we had the T-shirts and the rings and everything else, you just knew them in society to be they were a good dude. And that's somebody I want to be like. And then you're like, oh, and he's a Freemason. Okay. Just because you wear the ring, just because you've got square and compasses on your T-shirt, people are looking for more than that. And I think that's the thing. And that's where we take what we learn in the lodge and take the tools and use the tools outside the lodge as well. It's not old-fashioned to still open a door or say thank you to anyone. We think that is passe and of a different time. I'm probably the only person in the world who, for Father's Day, their kids got them the century anniversary of Emily Pote's Ettiquette. But it still applies. Oh, no, by the way, it is updated. Her actually great-grandchildren now run the foundation.
Wow.
Yeah, again, we think these things don't have a place in society, and actually they do now more than ever.
I'm making 2 notes here. One, there's a smile on my face and in my voice because I go back to Brother Angel Millar, who famously said, "Oh, well, you're a knight in Freemasonry. Do you act like a knight? Do you live like a knight? Or are you just carrying around that title?" And I love his voice and I love the way that he put it, but it's very true. Like, you are a master mason. Are you acting like a master mason every day? Are you carrying those virtues with you every day? Or are you just walking around with this special little title and saying, as you pointed out, I'm a master mason. I've got the ring. I got the T-shirt. I got the decal on the back of my car. Are you living the virtues that you have professed? I think it's a conversation that is meaningful to have in our lodge meetings that goes beyond the don't cross your legs, stand and salute this way and make sure that your arms are extended this way when we do all the introductions, because these are the lessons that extend beyond that parking lot, as we've kind of alluded to, into bringing it into everyday life. So I thank you for the work that you've done on this. I love you for this. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast, my brother.
Always a pleasure.
Now, before we let you go, because they do know you as our comics and the craft guy, what are you watching? What do you got your eye on these days when it comes to Marvel, Star Wars, anything in any of the cinematic universes?
I am waiting for somebody to do something that's actually going to impress me. As you and I have talked before, and with lots of other brothers who have the same interests, at least not on the print side, but within the streaming and the movie side of things, all of the organizations, whether it's DC, MCU, Lucas, writ large, have all kind of lost a little bit of direction. Still trying to find that storyline that's going to continue to advance the story rather than just adding basically adding another ornament onto it. I think the easiest way to describe it is right now they have the Star Wars Christmas tree or the Marvel Christmas tree or the DC Christmas tree, and they just want to keep hanging ornaments on it with no real rhyme or reason, to where when somebody comes and looks at the tree, they're like, "What the hell is that?
Another Batman movie? How many Batman movies can we have?
How many times can we reboot Fantastic Four?"
Yeah, that's going to be painful.
At least Ryan Reynolds pokes fun at Green Lantern every chance he gets. So.
Thanks again to my guest this week, Worshipful Brother Wes Latchford, and here's to practicing the 3-minute rule every day. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us on Spotify, subscribe on Apple Podcasts and YouTube. That way you'll get a notification for our next live stream recording. This is Right Worshipful Brother Michael RC. You can support the Craftsman Online podcast on Patreon. Yeah, just click open your podcast player and you'll see the link to start your free 7-day trial and get access to subscriber-only content and enjoy an ad-free listening experience. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.